I was still standing in the doorway of that Newport country club when the world tilted beneath me, the noise of clinking glasses fading into a dull roar. The afternoon light hit the marble floors so harshly it almost hurt to look at, and for a moment, I couldn't tell if the sting in my eyes came from the brightness or the humiliation burning its way up my throat. If you've ever felt invisible in a room full of people who claim to know you, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. These moments are far more common than we admit. I clutched the gift I brought for my daughter, realizing no one had even noticed I'd arrived. That was the moment I understood something was terribly wrong. Let me show you how it all began. By the time I stepped inside the Newport Country Club, the humiliation hit me before anyone said a word. It was the way people glanced at me, the way their eyes slid over my discount dress as if I were part of the staff. And then came the moment that broke something deep inside me. My own daughter drifting past me with a smile, acting as though she didn't know me at all. I could feel the dismissal in her posture, the way she acted like I had wandered into a world I didn't belong in. Her future in-laws hovered nearby, wrapped in judgment. I could sense what they were thinking long before they bothered to look in my direction. They saw a woman who didn't match their setting, a mother they believed their son's bride had outgrown. I stood there clutching a wedding gift I'd worked overtime to afford, realizing I was being erased in time. What stunned me wasn't the cruelty, but the ease of it. My daughter didn't hesitate. She absorbed their world so completely that stepping over me seemed natural to her. And in that moment, something cracked. Not the old heartbreak I'd been carrying, but a sharper break, the kind that makes you finally see the truth. I kept wondering how a child reaches a point where pretending her own mother doesn't exist feels easier than acknowledging where she came from. And as I stood there, I began thinking back to the years before everything shifted. Looking back now, it almost feels like a different lifetime. Before the polished marble floors of that Newport country club, before the cold glances and quiet humiliation, it was just me and my daughter Jenna against the world. I raised her on a tight budget and a lot of love, working long shifts at the claims office and coming home to homework sessions at the kitchen table. Those evenings were our rhythm. I would sit with her while she practiced reading or told me about her day. And I always felt this deep gratitude that I got to be her safe place. I remember the little traditions we built without even realizing it. Sunday pancakes, birthday cakes made from scratch because buying one felt like a luxury, road trips to lakes and state parks when I didn't have the money for anything more. She used to cling to my arm on those walks, telling me I was her whole world. And for years, I believed that bond was unshakable. Things didn't shift all at once. It began slowly, the way a small crack in a window widens without you noticing. When she met Colin during her senior year of college, I sensed a change before I ever saw it. There was something different in the way she spoke about him. Lighter, more careful, almost rehearsed. I could hear the influence of his world in her words, a world where people measured themselves by the kinds of vacations they took and what their families were known for. When I finally met him, I felt a subtle distance settle between us. It wasn't anything he said. It was what Jenna didn't say. She seemed nervous, as though she was suddenly aware of every chipped mug in our kitchen, every crease in my thrifted blouse. It was the first time I felt her slipping just slightly out of reach. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was nothing more than growing pains. But deep down, I could feel a shift, a quiet warning that something larger was beginning to take shape, something that would lead us straight into the first real fracture between us. And that fracture showed itself in the most unexpected place: the wedding guest list. I still remember exactly where I was when Jenna called me that afternoon. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sorting through a small stack of insurance files, the same table where I used to help her with spelling tests and science projects. When I saw her name on the screen, I felt that familiar spark of warmth, expecting one of our easy conversations. Instead, her voice in my memory now feels distant and practiced, almost like she was reading from a script she didn't want me to question. She spoke about adjustments, a word that carried more weight than she realized. As she explained the Whitmore family's expectations, I felt an uneasy chill settle in my chest. Then she mentioned the limit: 3 seats for my entire side of the family. Just 3. Me, my sister, and maybe one neighbor who had helped raise her. The rest of the people who shaped her life simply didn't fit the image she was trying to present. I remember sitting there in silence long after the call ended, staring at the photo albums I had pulled out earlier that week. Pictures of birthday parties held in our tiny backyard, school plays where I sat in the front row alone, holidays where I tried to make everything feel magical even when money was tight. Every page felt like a reminder of a love that suddenly didn't seem to matter. That was the moment I realized something foundational had shifted. And as painful as it was, I knew I needed to see who Jenna was becoming. And that meant finally meeting the Whitmore family. I still remember driving into Beacon Hill for the first time, feeling my old sedan strain up those narrow brick streets, as if even the car understood it didn't belong there. When I pulled up in front of the Whitmore home, a tall brownstone with polished brass fixtures and windows that looked like they had never known fingerprints, I felt a tightness in my chest. It was beautiful, undeniably so, but it also radiated a kind of quiet message. People like me were only meant to stand on the outside looking in, walking through their front door. I was met with a flood of details that made me instantly aware of myself in ways I hadn't been in years. My shoes suddenly felt cheap against the marble floor. My jacket seemed too practical, not elegant enough. Even my voice sounded different in that echoing hallway, thinner somehow. Mrs. Whitmore greeted me with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Everything she said felt wrapped in velvet, but sharpened underneath. Little reminders that Jenna was entering a world with expectations far beyond anything I had ever imagined. I could feel her assessing me, my clothes, my posture, my background, as if she were checking off boxes on a list of what she considered shortcomings. Mr. Whitmore barely looked up from whatever he was reading, offering only the kind of polite nod people give to someone who will never be relevant in their lives. What hurt most was watching Jenna. She wasn't unkind, but she seemed to study her parents for cues before responding to me, softening herself to fit their rhythm. I saw her adjusting her tone, her posture, even the way she laughed. It was subtle, but it was enough to tell me that she was slipping further away, drawn toward a world where I didn't fit, leaving their home that day. I felt a quiet dread settle in. This wasn't just about different backgrounds. It was the beginning of a divide that would only grow wider, a divide that would reach its cruelest point on the wedding day itself. I arrived at the venue early, hoping the quiet would steady me. The place looked like something cut out of a glossy magazine spread. White stone arches, manicured gardens, and rows of staff moving with choreographed precision. My clothes felt plain against all that shine. The moment I stepped out of my car, someone hurried over and asked me where the catering boxes should go. It caught me so off guard that I just stood there, clutching the small gift I had worked on for months. I told myself it was an innocent mistake, but it happened again when I walked through the courtyard. Another staff member gestured for me to help arrange centerpieces. Each time, I felt myself shrink a little more. The gift in my hands, a scrapbook of Jenna's childhood I had assembled page by page, suddenly felt out of place in a world obsessed with pristine surfaces and perfect photographs. I kept it close, hoping there might be a quiet moment to give it to her. A reminder of where she came from. Inside the ceremony hall, an usher led me to the very last row. So far back, I could barely see the altar through the tall floral arrangements. I asked if there had been a mistake, but the way he avoided my eyes told me everything. I sat down slowly, feeling the weight of every empty seat in the front rows where I should have been. When the music began and Jenna appeared at the top of the aisle, she looked stunning, glowing in a way that took my breath away. But she walked arm in arm with Colin's father, not once glancing in my direction. It stung in a way I didn't know how to prepare for. I tried to tell myself she was nervous, overwhelmed, distracted, but deep down, something cracked again. As the ceremony unfolded, I could feel the Whitmore family's satisfaction radiating through the room. Not cruel on the surface, but confident, like they had rearranged the world exactly the way they wanted it, leaving no space for me. Sitting there, I realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was deliberate, a quiet erasure. And beneath the humiliation, a different feeling began to take shape. A sharp clarity, a sense that something even deeper was happening behind the scenes. I didn't know it yet, but the truth was already pulling itself toward me, waiting to be uncovered. After the ceremony ended, I slipped out of the reception hall, needing air more than anything else. My chest felt tight, my cheeks burned, and I could still feel the sting of being placed at the very back like an afterthought. I wandered down a side corridor lined with old portraits, letting the quiet settle around me. For the first time that day, I felt like I could breathe without eyes pressing into me. That was when I heard them, low voices drifting from an open doorway. I recognized the cadence immediately. Mrs. Whitmore's sharp whisper layered over the deeper hum of her husband. At first, I wanted to turn away, but something in their tone rooted me in place. I caught pieces of what they were discussing, enough to understand it had nothing to do with the wedding. Instead, the words blended into something far heavier, talk of pending inquiries, concerns about an SEC review, mentions of insurance claims that did not align with their reported losses. As I stood there, the realization hit me with a clarity that cut through every ounce of hurt. I had spent my entire career handling insurance investigations. I knew the language, the red flags, the patterns. They knew that too, and suddenly, their cold treatment made sense. Keeping me at a distance wasn't about embarrassment. It was about protection. They couldn't risk having someone with my background anywhere near their affairs. Curiosity pulled me toward the open office door once they walked away. I stepped inside, my heartbeat quickening. Papers were scattered across the desk. Policy numbers, loss statements, inflated valuations. Even at a glance, I could see the inconsistencies. My instincts took over. I pulled out my phone and quietly photographed every page, knowing exactly what I was looking at and what it could mean. In that moment, My humiliation transformed into something steadier, sharper. The erasure, the condescension, the seating arrangement, it all formed a clear picture. This wasn't just cruelty, it was strategy. And as I stepped back into the corridor, holding the truth in my pocket, I felt a new certainty rising inside me. The time for silence was over. The reckoning was coming, and it would happen before the night was through. When I walked back into the reception hall, the room thrummed with laughter, clinking glasses, and the kind of easy confidence that comes from people who believe the world bends for them. I felt strangely calm, steadier than I had all day. The truth in my pocket anchored me. I waited until the band eased into a soft instrumental piece, then caught the band leader's eye. A small nod from me, a curious pause from him, and the music faded. Stepping toward the center of the room felt like moving through water, slow and deliberate. Hundreds of eyes followed me, confused at first, then irritated, then wary. I could feel the Whitmore family stiffen even before I reached the microphone. I spoke from the same place where I had carried every sacrifice for Jenna. Quiet, but unwavering. I shared who I was, not as an apology, but as a statement of fact, reclaiming my place in the room they tried to erase me from. I explained what I had stumbled upon, how my background made it impossible for me to ignore the documents left in plain sight, how the inconsistencies were not just mistakes, but patterns. I didn't need to raise my voice. The room grew colder with each revelation. I could sense the panic ripple through Mrs. Whitmore, her smile tightening into something brittle. Mr. Whitmore's composure cracked in the smallest ways, shifting weight, darting glances, a stiffness in his jaw. Guests who moments earlier toasted their elegance now stared at them with dawning unease. Then the doors opened. The sight of the agents entering, badges displayed, shifted the entire atmosphere. Conversations dropped into stunned silence. Chairs scraped. Someone gasped. It was as if the glossy world the Whitmores built collapsed in on itself in a single breath. Jenna's face is what stays with me. Shock, confusion, hurt, layers of emotions she wasn't prepared to carry. I felt no triumph in that moment, only a deep sadness for the child who had been pulled into something far bigger than she understood. As the agents moved toward her new family, I stepped back, letting the truth settle across the room. The reckoning had begun, and in the quiet that followed, I felt the weight of what the aftermath would bring. The moment the agents stepped in, the reception shifted from polished celebration to stunned silence. People who had looked through me all afternoon suddenly avoided meeting my eyes, as if acknowledging me now meant acknowledging the truth unraveling right in front of them. I didn't feel any urge to stay and watch the fallout. The truth had already done what it needed to do. I walked out quietly, moving past clusters of guests whispering in shock, past centerpieces that suddenly felt like props from a world collapsing under its own weight. For the first time that day, I felt my dignity return to me, not handed back by anyone, just reclaimed from everything they tried to bury it under. There was heaviness, yes, but also relief. Truth costs something, but silence costs far more. As I stepped into the cool evening air, I wondered what this would mean for Jenna. That question followed me home, waiting for its answer. It was late the next evening when I heard the knock. Soft, hesitant. Nothing like the confident rhythm Jenna used to have. The house had been quiet since I came home from the wedding, that kind of quiet that settles after a storm. When I opened the door, She was standing there, shoulders curled inward, makeup smudged, eyes red in a way that told me she had finally seen the full truth of the world she'd stepped into. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The way she looked at me, broken, lost, stripped of the certainty that had pushed me aside, said more than words could. All the arrogance, all the borrowed confidence from the Whitmores had fallen away. What was left was the little girl I raised, the one who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares. My first instinct was to protect her. My second was to pull back. The pain of the past weeks sat heavy between us, but so did something older and stronger. I stepped aside, letting her in. She moved toward me slowly, like she wasn't sure she deserved to. When she finally leaned into me, her body shaking, I felt the years of love return in a single breath. We didn't fix everything in that moment, but something important shifted. A door opened again, and that was where the real lesson began. In the quiet days that followed, I found myself replaying everything, not to reopen wounds, but to understand what it all meant. The truth is, loving someone, especially your own child, is not the same as losing yourself for them. I spent years believing that unconditional love meant shrinking whenever necessary, bending whenever asked, and quietly carrying every burden so Jenna could walk freely. But this experience taught me something different. Real love needs room for honesty. It needs boundaries. It needs the courage to step into the light when staying silent would be easier. Watching Jenna return home reminded me that forgiveness is not a single act. It's a process. It requires both people to face what happened without excuses. She has her own path of healing, her own lessons to absorb, and I know we will rebuild what was broken one careful step at a time. And for the first time in years, I'm rebuilding myself too, standing a little taller, trusting my instincts, and recognizing that dignity is not something others can give or take. It's something I decide to claim. This whole journey reminded me that truth can be painful, but it's also freeing. It clears the air. It sets the stage for real connection. And sometimes, it protects the very people who once rejected it. If you've ever found yourself torn between love and self-respect, or if you've lived through a moment where you finally chose honesty over acceptance, I'd love to hear your story. Share your experience in the comments. I read everyone,